and welcome to this conversation on Data is the New Water, which is brought to you by BloombergQuint and powered by Hero Wired. Insights are ever more critical for decisions today, and many believe that data and using data right is as valuable as our most critical resource for living today, which is water and air. Getting data analytics right is important for driving customer loyalty and delivering superlative customer experiences. Data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are a trifecta in these technology stakes. With 5G now in our sights in India, we are heading for a paradigm shift when it comes to our understanding and use cases for data science, machine learning, and AI. But just as much as it is important to ensure that business strategy leverages technology strategy that has data, machine learning, and AI at the core, getting it right is equally, if not more important. Data science, ML, and AI are no magic wands but need high data quality, which is often the speed breaker for many businesses. Today, in this BloombergQuint conversation on Data is the New Water, powered by Hero Wired and part of our series on reimagining the Techverse, we will aim to understand the state of data analytics in India, look at use cases across sectors, understand what are the key building blocks and the vision that is necessary for the future, and ultimately look at the critical issue of skilling, which is at the heart of getting analytics right. And to help us do that, we have with us today Pranav Arora, who's Managing Director and Lead Applied Intelligence Accenture in India. We also have Dr. Avik Sarkar, who is Visiting Associate Professor, Data Technology and Public Policy, Indian School of Business. And next up, we have Dipyaman Sanyal, who is Head Academics and Learning Hero Wired and is considered one of the top 10 data scientists in India today. Thank you so much for being here, gentlemen, and for joining this panel. So even as I start, right, I want to, like I said, we hope to divide this into the state of data in India today, understand some of the issues, the challenges, look at sectoral use cases, and try and build a vision, a framework for the future, and finally understand the skilling parts. Dr. Sarkar, I want to start with you. You've done some phenomenal work in this space, especially at the Niti Aayog, etc., creating some of these frameworks. So when you see Indian businesses and government today, do you think we are able to effectively use AI tools, or is there a gap between promise and really the enterprise readiness?
So thanks, Ivor, for this question. Yes, I think when we look into the Indian businesses and the government, we are looking at a huge spectrum. So there will be some businesses, particularly from the side, say telecom, banking, insurance, which have been using data science and AI for quite some time. But then on the other hand, you see also sectors like, say, healthcare, agriculture, which are only starting to use some amount of data science or doing very basic data insights generation from there. From the government perspective, also governments are always are a bit laggard in the adoption of emerging technologies. So the use of data science and data analytics by the government has also something that has recently started in the last few years. We see a few use cases that some government departments and a few states are getting engaged in. But I think if you look at majority of the states and majority of the ministries, they are still unaware of what these things can do for them.
Great. So that's an absolutely amazing insight, Dr. Sarkar. And you're very right? While there are a few pilot cases, I think a majority are still unable to really make complete use of them. Now, Pranav, you work a lot with businesses, and of course, Accenture also works with governments across the world. So what's your take on this from a business perspective? And really, how do we meet, what do you see as some of the more important data challenges out there? And how do we get data quality right? What are some of the gaps and how do we bridge them?
Yeah. So I was, first of all, thanks a lot for having us. But let me unpack that. There are a couple of questions there. So I think first up, while there has been a huge increase in use of data in the recent times, there are still multiple challenges that people have around how they have thought about it in the first place. And I think that's really the first challenge that comes, which is what is your data strategy? What is the enterprise architecture that you have and how does data fit into that? And I think one of the key challenges with both the data quality and democratizing data is the clarity on the strategy itself. Related to that is obviously C-suite sponsorship, because sometimes getting this architecture right, getting this investment, requires C-suite buy-in. And unless you have a fairly strong C-suite sponsor, which should hopefully be the CEO, it becomes difficult to get this investment. And then there are questions around obviously business case, which will not get answered when you do only part of this work. The third related point is obviously, the skills. And you mentioned that briefly. But think about it, right? The spectrum of skills that is now required has changed completely. You cannot think about only building one or two data models. You have to think about the kind of data products. And that skill set is completely different. And, those I think are the three key factors that we need to probably consider.
Thanks so much for that insight, Pranav, and especially that you bring from your rich experience. Deep, I wanted to come to you with a slightly different angle, right? I mean, we've understood some of the data challenges, etc., and maybe what we need to do to what are the things that need to be done right. But one of the issues also is that data is understood very differently in different kinds of organizations, whether it's government, whether it's enterprise, whether it's startup. And if we just look at enterprise and startups, enterprises are very compliance driven. So maybe they're not as agile. While startups do things, in a very agile manner, but they miss out on the important aspects of privacy and security. So how can enterprises really get the framework right to use data in agile manner, while startups really understand how to prioritize security and privacy when it comes to data use?
That's, Ivor, a fantastic question, because when we work with startups, we see the usage of technology or open source has taken up so much of their bandwidth, and the way they're being extremely agile about it. But data security, data quality, data leakage, the terms are not just becoming popular; they're becoming popular for a reason. I think as a part of our conversation with our faculty members at MIT, also we were talking about data ethics frameworks, right? So the researchers at MIT, they're doing a fantastic job trying to put together frameworks on data ethics, data governance, etc. I know some work in Stanford is also going on. The idea is to bring these best practices, especially to early stage startups, and a huge need for self-regulation will start coming in, because the government or government agencies can only do so much. It has to be self-regulation at the end of the day. On the other hand, I see enterprises, especially in highly regulated sectors like banking or pharma, healthcare, being forced in some cases to avoid certain open source platforms because the mandate is clear. Again, I think lobbying efforts or informing the government, having that dialogue with industry, I think that really needs to pick up. We don't really have an industry standard or a body which is primarily talking about data, which connects industry, government, academia. We don't have that yet. But maybe this is the right time to think about it for all of us.
So, Dr. Sarkar, you heard both Pranav and Deep speak about some of the challenges. What's your take on it, given that you've been in government, you've suggested frameworks, etc. You've obviously advised private sector also, and now you are in academia. So you've kind of bridged all the three. But what's your take on some of these challenges, etc., and what we need to get right?
See, data challenges is very crucial before we can think about reaping benefits out of data science or AI, which is a very, very important thing. I can give you an example. When I actually worked extensively with the Singapore government also. It was through my work at Accenture. I was working in Accenture Singapore, and we worked extensively with the government. And it was a very common thing in the education sector over there to look at student marks and based on that suggest how they are going to do in their future years, and then suggest them electives and stuff of that nature. So similar things. So they had all this data in digitized format, so they could run those things, and Ministry of Education in Singapore could help gives insights to the schools, and they can then tutor and have a discussion with the students based on that. The technology is the same, and the government of Andhra Pradesh, with one of the tech giants in India, had done a pilot on similar nature. They had looked at the marks of class 5, class 6, class 7 of the students, and based on that, they have suggested which are the student most likely to drop off. And dropping off from a school is a big challenge in India. But the catch in the pilot that was done by this tech giant was that this data was not available to them in digital format. They digitized all this data by hand, by spending months of manual hours to demonstrate this capability for the Andhra Pradesh government. That is very good if you have to demonstrate something that this works. But if you have to run it as an operational process, the cost to run the analytics is 100 rupees. Cost to digitize the data, 1 crore. No school will do it. So that is where it happens. Even though the technologies are available, the data, if it's not available in digital format, we cannot do those analytics, even though the technology is available and this sort of things are happening world across. And even in India, we have demonstrated that. But to roll it out as a solution that can be taken up from a pilot to a proof of concept to productization, there is a huge gap because the data doesn't exist.
Absolutely, I think that is such a huge challenge, right? And I'm sure all of you all have faced it. I'm sure all of you all have stories of, I think Deep was once mentioning to me when we had a conversation of a company that told him that we have multiple data lakes, right? Which is a problem in itself. So, one of the things I also want to come to is really, we are living in very uncertain times, and while it now seems like the pandemic is once again gone. We felt like this even, I think, back in November, but then we had Omicron coming. Pranav, I wanted to ask you, how has the pandemic and the massive resulting disruption, how has it boosted really spending on analytics and AI? Because, companies, governments, etc., see this as very, very critical today. And what's really been happening in that space?
So you're right. I think that this pandemic has had a huge effect on spending. We have seen the number of players wanting to do these transformation initiatives go up significantly. And there is a lot of data which substantiates how people who have either invested earlier in technology or started investing now, how they have outperformed. Our research around it clearly indicates that the leaders around technology tend to do much better, even 4 times better. Now, what has happened is that everyone's kind of now jumped onto the bandwagon, trying to say that, hey, we have to, leverage this technology. What's very interesting is that there are some players who have taken this time to think about it a little bit more strategically and make a long-term investment. Think of it like an investment that they're going to, fundamentally change the way they run their business, fundamentally transform it. But there is another group which has kind of resorted to a little bit of, I would say, short-termism. They are the ones who are looking at this and saying, hey, can you do this one use case for me right now? Can you plug this particular problem? And I think at least what our research says is that only if you're able to think about this in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the underlying investments that you need to make, would you have a better chance at long-term success?
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely key, thinking long-term and also using this time. I wanted to quickly jump to some of the sectoral uses and what's really happening, get into a little more of the granularity, right? I think we've spoken from a 30,000 feet perspective, but I wanted to jump into a little more granularity. And I wanted to start out with you, Dr. Sarkar, in terms of, especially with your government experience. What do you think of some of the work that has happened already in, sectors like agriculture, public health, etc., in terms of data being used? And what do you see as some of the big possibilities in the coming years over here?
So yes, see, there is good work happening, but they are happening in pockets. So I can tell you that the government of Andhra Pradesh is using drones, and based on the picture taken by the drones, they're using artificial intelligence to identify and detect what is the quality of the road. And based on that, they're classifying every small segment of the road into whether it's a good road, muddy road, or bad road, and which is then passed on to the administration and the APCM dashboard, the real-time governance dashboard. This information is available in real time. So drones are flown, and this has been happening in real time. But say it's only one of the 30 states which is doing it. So someone is doing it, some innovation, but there is a lot of more scope that is there. Always we also hear that agriculture advisory for agriculture is happening in pockets. There is again, I think we often take the examples of Andhra and Telangana because I believe that what they are doing in India is much more. They are much more ahead of India as an average from the tech adoption, and because of this rivalry between these two states, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, they compete against each other, and they are taking overall India to a much more higher level because their use cases are really advanced. There is a RFP which I have seen. So they have gone from a pilot, from a proof of concept to a pilot. So they have taken certain districts where they have rolled out RFPs where agriculture advisory services and using data science and AI will be taken by the state government and will be rolled out. So there is agriculture advisory, and where what we are looking at is the precision agriculture is a field where private players are already doing it across the world. And this is something that some of the districts in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana are trying to work on those aspects there. Malnutrition is a big problem in India, and it's often a challenge to measure the height, weight, and the head circumference of a small child. So Wadwani AI, again, an organization based in Mumbai, they have come up with a very interesting solution where they take a 5-second video. And there's also a norm where the social stigma in a lot of rural areas that is there is that we won't allow the child to be weighed, because they consider it a bad auspicious thing that they will not let the child be weighed. So to overcome these things, what they have come up with that you take a 5-second video of the child, and based on that, the AI estimates the height, weight, and the head circumference of the child. So there are interesting innovations that are happening on say small pocket. Again, this is a pilot which has happened in UP in some districts, and they are now trying to roll it out. But again, there are success stories, but then there is a long way to go for all the other states to catch up with. While we talk about this, there are many states which doesn't even understand what is the difference between a machine readable data and a PDF data and a scanned copy of some numbers written on a page. There are states who don't even understand the difference between that. So the understanding on what data can do for you varies quite a lot. So where some are really advanced, but some are really lagging behind.
Well, I think that is a reflection. I wanted to come to you with that, Pranav. Is that an accurate representation also in the corporate world? Because basic understanding, right? And I'm sure maybe to some extent it is, while maybe not in all sectors. Sectors like BFSI and telecom, they've always been very mature, right, when it comes to technology, and they are certainly big users of analytics. They understand data well. They understand AI well. But what about some of the other sectors, like manufacturing, pharma, healthcare, etc.? And do you really also see the same sort of problems that Dr. Sarkar alluded to in different state governments, again, behaving very differently?
So I think, at least in my experience, the knowledge level or understanding level of what data is and the fact that they need to use it is quite high. I think people are they're also generally sold onto the story that data is the new water, the new oil, etc. I think where there is a challenge is in the translation of that to what they would probably need to make it successful, and what's the use case. So, for example, let's take BFSI, right? And they are high users of data, but it's also a very complex landscape. So think about it, right? There are systems around marketing that they have. They have all these mobile apps. They have, lots of core systems for their treasury, for their core banking. Now, getting your data architecture right across all of this is not a simple task. Add to that layers of complexity around the fact that, some of these systems that they're using may be either SaaS systems, may be deployed in different parts of it. They have limited ownership on some of these systems. Then, where the data is generated is different, right? So for example, for a lot of marketing systems or, front-end applications, the data is itself being generated in the cloud. So it's not an easy task to kind of bring all of this together. So I think having that clarity of thinking and willing to make that investment to get this right is a challenge. I also think the other big challenge that they have is in terms of how to, okay, now that I've generated an insight, let's say I've built a recommendation system around what should I kind of tell you, what's the best product to increase your wealth, let us say. Now, how do I make it available to you? It means you need to make the change in their mobile banking apps, in their downstream systems, which is, again, a fairly difficult piece to do because a lot of these systems are not built inherently with those kind of data-driven architectures. Think about something that we always encounter, like UPI, right? One of my favorite cribs is, when I give my UPI ID, right, and then I go to my banking app, I want to see that transaction right up front. When I immediately log in, I want to be able to approve that. But is that something that works? That's a very simple data use case, but no, it won't work. I will need to go down 2, 3, 4 clicks into any bank's app to the place where they have those UPI transactions to approve that. So it's not just about the challenge with doing the analytics or building the AI, but also the complexity around the consumption of it. And equally, so machine consumption is one kind of challenge. The human consumption is also a different story altogether.
That's truly, you brought in some really amazing insights, Pranav, over there. And Deep, I wanted to come to you over. You're a data scientist. What's your take on all of this, and what's also your take on some of these other sectors, like going beyond BFSI and telecom, which are some of the big users? And how do you think also from a government perspective, maybe also you can comment on that, right? How can they do that better? So again, I'm asking you from a 360-degree perspective. I know it's a large question, but being a data scientist, I'm asking you from a practitioner perspective.
Yeah, see, luckily I've had the opportunity to work with multiple government agencies, multiple corporations, and of course on the education side of things. And I think what Avik and Pranav very, very valid. I'll just break that down to 2 or 3 things. One is, I consulted with the NSDC for a year on how to utilize their data, right? Changes are happening, right? So the traditional monitoring, and it still happens that, there's monitoring of the training centers at NSDC. And these were done on pen and paper, of course, right? But now, I think last year, the Skill Development Corporation launched an app. So now the monitoring is happening, the data is being fed, it doesn't need connectivity, it gets into the app, it stays there. The moment it has connectivity, it uploads it to the cloud, right? So we see those changes on one side. On the other side, I was at a Smart Cities conference a couple of years back, and at that point, Smart Cities was really big. And there were folks from industry, academia, ministries, of course. Whole day conference. At the end of the whole day, I realized that nobody has really used the word data in a Smart Cities conference. We are not talking about smart cities. We are talking about sewage and street lighting, and this is not smart cities. This is a city. This is what a city should be like to begin with. Smart cities is a distant dream. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm not saying there's lack of initiative. It's just that it can make it happen quicker, right? So a lot of the use cases that we have been seeing, and I think that should start creating a lot of data on its own, are in areas like Internet of Things, right? Are in areas like visual analytics, right? Where that data and can be ingested, utilized, We had a fantastic talk the other day with Sanjay Sharma. He's a professor at MIT, and he was speaking to my students. And he's one of the people who built the standards for RFID worldwide. And he showed us some of those use cases on how they're figuring out that which homes are leaking more heat, right? Which streetlights are not working. Basic things like that. So you can have a generation jump in a country like India. Maybe we missed out on the boat on certain things, but with potentially with 4G already there, 5G potentially coming in, with a lot of startups doing extremely interesting work. Same for agriculture, right? And we can collect the drone data, and it's not that expensive. That I think is one big thing that I really wanted to mention, that some of the innovation is not supremely expensive innovation. It can be done at a fairly nominal or manageable cost. It doesn't require that kind of infrastructure. Of course, when you're productionizing it, going to larger enterprises, you have to. There's an alternative. And which is why I think there's a lot of growth that we are seeing and we will see in the near future, which will be inorganic, even in traditional sectors like banking and healthcare.
Absolutely. I think that really shows about, talks a lot about, the potential really that we have. Next, gentlemen, I really wanted to move towards, the future. We've spoken a lot about the challenges. We've spoken about sectors, some really amazing insights there, some great quotes from each of you. But as we move towards the future, Pranav, I wanted to start with you. One of the things you spoke about was really an AI quotient, right? And so, how do we really improve the AI quotient when it comes to senior leadership, in companies and governments, boards, etc.? What can be done about this so that they understand data and data analytics better, how to use it? They understand, that whether the building blocks are good enough, whether it work as intended, is it being used in an acceptable, ethical way, and of course, are they really scalable and optimized for the long term?
So all of these people that you're talking about, they are senior, very brilliant folks by themselves. So I guess the first thing is that they need to realize how critical it is. See, they are deciding the future strategic direction of the company. They are the ones who are deciding how investments happen. So if they do not understand what kind of a change this is, they may end up making decisions that they would deeply regret. So I think the first thing is that they need to really understand that, hey, there is this tectonic shift that is happening, that is being driven by AI. And I think we've talked a lot about data today. We haven't really kind of climbed the mountain and talked about AI and robotics and how an AI workforce is changing the dynamics of a business per se. So the first thing is that they need to understand. And I think if they do, there are more than enough resources to kind of pick up on it or understand the resource. I mean, they would have enough connections within the industry as they speak to others. A lot of social learning. There isn't anyone who is not kind of talking about it on social media, right? Some of the most brilliant professors, all the people who are doing seminal work, they are all on YouTube. They're all on Twitter. So there's a lot of social learning, so as to say that they can do and they can pick up on these concepts of how others are thinking about it. The other thing that I think is super critical is to, for them to kind of do some thought experiments by themselves, right? And I think Einstein has used that mechanism also. I mean, so thought experiments on how they can apply the technology. Because yes, the technology, it's not that they will learn from somewhere else on what they should do with the technology. They can understand what the technology does. How to apply it would be something that these executives would really need to come up with. And the more they engage in these thought experiments, the better they will be able to define and come up with how they want to approach it. I mean, I want to share a small story here, which is, if you think about it, luggage, the trolleys that we have, and it's one of my favorite stories, it's captured in multiple books. The trolleys that we have with, these little wheels, they were invented or commercialized only in 70s and 80s. 1978, I think they got a patent. 84, they commercialized it. But both wheels and luggage, the concept is thousands of years old. So it was the application of that. And imagine thousands and millions of people traveling who were carrying their luggage till 84, till 90s, till this became, right? So there is potential in the technology. The leaders need to kind of upskill themselves. They have to take that responsibility. It can't come from somewhere else. And they need to conduct these thought experiments so that they can, see how they will take their organizations into the future.
Absolutely, that's such a beautiful example, really, Pranav, and really, leads me to many, many directions. I won't go into that here, but it's really fascinating when you think of that, right? I mean, wheels were there, bags were there, but just to bring the two together, just the application. One of the other things, and you referred to this, Deep, was really establishing industry, academia, government initiatives, right? To really take some of these things forward from pilots into realistic projects that work across companies, across sectors, etc. So how do we really go about doing this? How do we really align this part of the vision? And could we also look at multilateral collaboration? So, for instance, one that's talked a lot about today is the Quad, right? The grouping between India, the United States, Australia, and Japan. Now, while it's obviously seen by some as very strategic and military in nature, but actually it's not, right? There's a huge component of vaccines, etc. But it could also certainly include elements of data analytics and more standards exist. So what's your take on this entire paradigm of industry, government, academia collaborations, initiatives, and maybe even if you look at it from a multilateral perspective?
I think I'll probably answer that in two parts. First is from an industry academia collaboration, industry academia government collaboration. I think it's in the need of the hour. I think certain institutions are trying to do it. But one of the things that I haven't seen, and we're just working on it ourselves, is you don't have a single anyone in the this ed tech or online learning space who's doing anything related to research and development. No one. And that's where the thought came from. Like, why there are multiple people doing ed tech in this country across the gamut, and they're doing interesting things. They might be competitors, doesn't matter. But is anybody going out there, because you are kind of at that point, right, where you know industry better than maybe traditional academia sometimes. You know the academics because after all, you're a learning institution. Of course, we have our friends in the government and so on. Not been done yet, right? And it's something that I'm planning to do. It's initiatives that has to be very individualized, but it has to be done. I mean, because most of the efforts that we see when industry goes to the government, it just becomes lobbying, and nothing against it. It is what it is, right? But then the greater cause sometimes gets lost. That our students need to understand what sort of innovations can be done, which will be for social good, which can work with the government. Building in, moving to industry, getting them to work with education and vice versa. Right? That's how the ecosystem is going to get built. We know that we have such a huge skills gap in this country. Right? We have engineers, we have MBA students coming out, graduating, who are unfortunately unemployable. So the system has failed them in some way. But if these three things, this trifecta doesn't come together and build the next step, I know there's some very interesting work going on in creating skills universities by governments and so on. So it's happening. But I think the pace at which it needs to happen should be, it should be much faster, because one favorite term that I keep using is that demographic disaster instead of demographic dividend. Right? I keep saying that everywhere I go, that your demographic dividend is going to turn into a demographic disaster unless you can channelize the energy of the youth and do it really fast. You'll be in big trouble. So it has to happen. I mean, I don't see an alternative. if it doesn't happen, it's yeah.
That's a very sobering reminder, Deep. And Dr. Sarkar, I wanted to ask this of you too, whether you have something to add, because again, like I said earlier, you bring a very unique perspective to this conversation. You've been in industry. You referred to your work at Accenture with what you did with the government of Singapore, etc. You've been in government with the Niti Aayog, which is one of India's highest policy making bodies, and now you're in academia and one of India's most respected institutions. So how do you really see all of them really coming together and working to get make sure that data analytics is better used in India, understood right, etc.?
Yes, so I think Deep touched upon a lot of the important aspects, and I'll just build upon them. I think it's very important to understand that you have collaborators with you, collaborators available to work with you. Currently, each of them work in silos. So if the government is looking at some policy decisions, they expect that someone has already done research on that. And I will tell you, there are a lot of the policy decisions that will happen, and when government makes its own policies, it will look out for researchers who had already worked on these areas and they are established. But if they are looking to answer certain questions, now there is not adequate funding available to support them. The industry funding or the foundation fundings that happens, they are again often focused on that particular industries and their market that they are trying to look, or particular segments. So I think government has to spend much more and rely much more on building intellectual capital of the country. So that will help the country as a whole. It will help the government in a lot of decision making and these things, and it will also help India take better leaps in publications, in research, and all those other aspects. So just yesterday, I was seeing the Stanford has published the AI index, where it ranks the countries globally on how they are doing on AI. I saw that India is number one on a lot of the aspects. I was seeing yesterday. 2021 ranking has come out. India is number one on a lot of the aspects, like say skilled people in AI, then number of skilled engineers and stuff. But India was not in the top 10 in various aspects, like say industry funding for these aspects, or the number of publications, the top publications from the different countries. It was not even in the top 10, which becomes a very important thing about whether you are an innovator and you are creating new things, or you are a replicator, means you are replicating things. There is nothing harm in that, but see, we have also to take the stance that we will develop something on our own. At some point in time, say, we don't take the first movers advantage in a lot of the things. We have an excellent network of hospitals in India, government-run hospitals. Farming, 50% of the population is available. We can collect all this data in a very cheap manner by putting sensors on the field, by flying drones over fields. It's very cheap to collect. It's like what you saw in the budget. Not even like 0.001% of that is required to collect data all over India. But that intention needs to be there to collect that and do it. Currently, what happens is you see a lot of the policies, particularly in a lot of the emerging tech that I work on, like say blockchain, the privacy policies, we wait for the West to develop the policy. And then what we call is that we do a policy transfer. We copy some of the parts from there and see what can be done from there. So there's a lack of original research in those areas that needs to be pushed. And government needs to understand that these are very important for the growth of the country.
Absolutely. I think you brought in some very important points over there, that if you really need to be an innovator, if you need to be a leader, then it is not just about having a skilled workforce, etc., but really about funding, about creating that ecosystem, and again having that desire to be right up there. We've really dealt with a lot of areas, and finally, I want to spend the last few minutes on dealing with, both of you all refer to workforce and skilling, and that is so important here, right? And again, you just said that India is one of the top countries over there. So, Pranav, you're at Accenture, you're one of India's biggest hirers in the knowledge space. So, are you seeing really a surge in demand for AI and analytics workforce, both within, of course, Accenture and with all the companies that you consult with? Is that being met, or is that a short? Is there a shortfall of sorts? And if so, how do we really bridge the gap?
No, so see, there is a high demand. There has been a spike in demand. Whether it's going to sustain beyond 24, 48 months is anyone's guess. And I say sustain for a couple of reasons. One is that yes, there has been a bit of spike in the work itself, but the other thing is also the productivity. So it's not just one side. It's both sides of the equation. And while, yes, absolutely, we need to get more skilled people in, but there's also a lot of work which is happening. So I'll talk about both sides of the equation, the skilling and then, managing the demand spike itself. So on the skill side, you think about the programs that NASSCOM is doing around skilling. You think about all the education institutes who have added an AI-based program, whether it's an MBA institute, engineering institute, there is AI and related components which are becoming part of the curricula. So there is some base skills that people will come in. Obviously, they are not industry ready. It's not that you pick a person out and he will suddenly be able to help you develop the best things. So that onus of transitioning people from the academic piece into making them really productive at work, that responsibility firms need to take, and we obviously take that quite seriously for people who join us. But there's the other side of the equation, which is around productivity. I think about what's happening on the productivity, right? All the things around DevOps, the low code, no code data science workbenches, and just the quality of the tools itself, even all the cloud providers, the ready algorithms, the composable stuff that you're getting is also really improving the productivity. So it's both sides of the equation. The productivity piece, I think so, is a good way of creating capacity in the short term. You need to be able to kind of get your team to do more, take away all of the rote tasks, use a lot more AI to do more AI in a way. And yes, I see a lot of action happening in terms of bringing skills, but yes, there is a path between the base skills and helping them contribute in industry where industry itself needs to play a role.
So, Deep, I want to throw a part of this challenge really to you too, right? So, how do technology and business specialists really upskill themselves, right? Because, as Pranav also said, right, people are not completely industry ready. And again, now reskilling, upskilling is becoming very important in this new normal as some of these technologies come. And, in some areas where they replace jobs, but also obviously they're also opening up a lot of new jobs. How do really people upskill themselves to kind of take advantage of some of these new jobs that are opening out in data science, etc.?
Sure. I'm very closely involved in this area, as you know. I think it's happening both ways. One is we are seeing a lot of interest among younger people who want to reskill themselves. We are seeing that interest not only in tier 1 cities. We're seeing that interest in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. And as an organization, we are really going after that. We are very, very involved in looking at folks in these tier 2, 3, 4 cities, where I believe that a large chunk of our system is failed in some ways, right? So that upskilling initiative, I think, is happening. But what we are all trying to do is get industry involved as much as possible. We need faculty members who have been in the industry. We need the Pranavs of the world to come and deliver lectures to our students, because and we need folks like Avik, who has the experience in the private sector and the government, to go and work in an university. Unless that starts happening at scale, we won't see the reskilling or the upskilling initiatives working so well. It won't happen. right? But it is happening. It is happening. We have these amazing faculty members who have been industry professionals, 15 years in the industry, 20 years in the industry, moving to full-time roles in teaching. Right? That's where I think it'll come from. The second perspective is businesses, as Pranav mentioned, are becoming much more serious about upskilling, especially in the initial days. A lot of work we are doing, seeing, interest that we are seeing is primarily in having these younger folks, these freshers, getting upskilled in the first 2 months after they join a new organization. Organizations are taking it much more seriously, I think, than they would even 10 years back, because the landscape is changing so fast. So it's happening. I mean, we see the demand, we see the interest, but we have a lot of people. It's going to take time.
Obviously, and it's very interesting. And you said that you hope to see Pranav. You said that people like Pranav should really come and deliver lectures, and
yes,
people like Professor Sarkar should be in academia. I think Professor Sarkar has definitely moved to academia.
Yeah, he's done it.
Pranav agrees to come and deliver lectures. Finally, one thing I wanted to quickly just deal with you, Deep. Earlier, most of this was around technology disciplines, right? Most of these technology was around technology. You had to have a technology background. It mandated an engineering degree, etc. Is this the same with AI and data analytics, or are we seeing greater demand for perhaps people with a business education, MBA, etc.? Quick take on that.
While from a data science perspective, right, and I'm going to broaden the horizon. I'm going to talk about data science is a catch-all phrase for business analytics, data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Over the years, I mean, it's been close to a decade since I've also been teaching and managing programs and so on. The success rate of folks coming in from a non-technology background and moving into this particular field has increased significantly over the last decade. I've had students who are medical doctors. I've trained 3 doctors till now, extremely successful, doing very, very well. I've trained multiple people coming from different kinds of backgrounds. Students coming in from communication, right? And some of the work that they have done is phenomenal. Right? So I think there is a room in this technology world today, which is very accepting in some ways. I mean, that the hedge fund D. Shaw, right? I mean, they hire poets, they hire philosophers, they hire musicians, and they're one of the most successful quant trading funds in the world. I mean, but they have a point, I think. And Pranav mentioned this, Avik mentioned this. This is not a straight line discipline. It's changing, but it's very holistic. I mean, back in the days, you learned statistics. You were, a statistician. You had some corporate person who understood the management side of things. You had designers who were doing data visualization. You had, today, and of course, you had technologists who were dealing with databases and big data. We expect to bring all of these guys together, right, under the same umbrella and come up with something which is much more holistic. People who learn how to connect the dots. And that I think is the future. I don't think it's going to be siloed between tech versus non-tech versus management. I mean, think of computer games. I mean, it's as much technology as design, as art, as everything, and the metaverse, whatever,
Well, connect the dots. I think that is a very interesting insight, and maybe that's a great note to close this discussion. I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Dr. Sarkar, because again, you've been in academia, whether you want to add anything to this entire workforce skilling issue part before we close.
Yes, I think what Dipyaman mentioned, connect the dot, is very, very important. And what also Pranav alluded some time back, what we primarily teach data science or AI in the education institution is to fit a model. If you get a data, this is the target that is you have to do, and this is what you have to fit. You have to identify these are some variables which will fit the data, and based on your algorithm and how the algorithm and the maths will work, you will fit the data. Either it predicts something or doing some sort of thing. But that is only a small part of the entire cycle. How do you go and collect data for this? Which are the data points that you require? Whether you have adequate things there, whether doing analytics of this manner is beneficial for the business and giving an ROI. And this is something that I've learned from Accenture. So no shame in sharing that with them. So everything that we would suggest to the customers, we would talk about that if you do this analytics, what is the ROI and what is the time period that you have to spend? Because investing in analytics requires a lot of investment and leadership buy-in. So you might spend a few crore rupees for years before seeing any benefits for some years. So whether and making that aware to the front customer at the beginning that okay, this is something that is very ambitious that you're trying to do. It might take you 3 years and then only you can reap the benefits, as compared to this something that you can do as a low-hanging fruit. So understanding this aspect. And even after all the technology things has been done, doing the change management, where you as a person is used to taking advice or insights based on your own. When you talk about AI-based decisions, now instead of taking the decisions on your own, you have to rely some of your thought process to a machine. So how do you share that? Do you trust the machines always? Do you trust the machine in some conditions, or do you not trust the machine at all? If you're not trusting the machine at all, that means that whole AI project that the company has invested in has gone into fail. So there is a mindset change also that has to happen there that will make this AI successful. So how humans and AI can work in tandem and help each other is something that we have to work at. Whereas you see the narrative is primarily around how humans and AI will compete and who will lose the job. So that has more of a masala angle to it. So you see more of that in the media. But I think how the two will work together is something that has to become more mainstream narrative.
Well, absolutely fascinating. And on that note, I think we have to bring this close. We've really talked about so many issues here. We've looked at the state of data. We've looked at the challenges. We've looked at sectors. We've looked at different use cases over there. We've looked at really how do you really build a vision for the future? How do you build some of these collaborations between industry, academia, government, etc. And finally, we've looked at the big issue of workforce skilling and change management and how to really bring about that. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here, for being part of this BloombergQuint conversation on data is a new water, which is powered by HeroWired and part of our series Reimagining the Techverse. I want to thank each one of you, Dr. Sarkar, Pranav, and Dipyaman, for the insights that you brought, for the time you took, and thank you for making this such an enriching discussion.